Welcome everybody to the Prime Conference 2018. It's a pleasure to have you all here. We have a very full programme, and unknown to the person behind the scenes who's in charge of slides, I'm adjusting it already. And the reason for that is that our keynote speaker, who I'm very, very keen for you to hear from, has a hard stop and has to leave at 1:30. So I'm going to do a short introduction and then hand over to our keynote speaker and then come back. Essentially, our theme for our Prime Conference is making a difference. That's what you are already doing. That's what we collectively are doing. And part of today is seeing what further changes we can make, what further developments we can make, what differences we can continue to make. So I will briefly say, actually I should also remind you that on the front of your programme you have a hashtag for those of you who are Twitterati. Feel free to tweet appropriately. I use that word very, very deliberately. Appropriately at the hashtag PrimeConf2018. So just to give you a little bit of pre-Prime context, some of you may have seen in November 2017 I had an opinion piece in The Times which talked about what we were doing in the social mobility arena in the legal profession. We get a lot of criticism, it's fair to say, for not doing enough. Part of my piece was that's unfair, that's not actually representative of the great strides that we have made. But clearly also a recognition of the fact that there are lots more things that we could be doing, and some are doing more than others. And really what I was saying was, let's work together and let's actually try and make a difference. And particularly don't leave it to somebody else to make a difference. So something I think you might just be interested to know is that this morning, immediately before this conference started, the Prime Board sat down with representatives of all of these organisations to talk about that very thing, how we could make a difference and whether there were things that we could be doing collectively which would actually move the needle. And there was a consensus around that table that this was not a one-off conversation and that we would continue the dialogue. So watch this space. Hopefully things will continue to move in the right direction. Thank you is where I'm going to begin. Thank you for the fact that you are playing a part in this social mobility area. It really is important. You don't need me to tell you that. I'm talking to an audience that absolutely gets that. But I don't take that for granted, and I'm absolutely not complacent about your commitment to social mobility and your participation in Prime. And so thank you for that commitment. And thank you also for your financial support. As you obviously know, we changed our funding model last year. Previously, Prime had been funded by the founding members. Now it's in effect, so to speak, pay-to-play arrangement. And the reason for that is that we had a lot of initiatives that I will be speaking about in a moment after our keynote speaker, and funding is an important part of that. The consequence of that was that a few of our Prime members decided that they no longer wished to be Prime members. That didn't greatly surprise us, and to be fair, it doesn't greatly trouble me. There was a lot of talk when I became chairman about, not amongst the board, but external commentators saying, I'll come, and indeed members of Parliament saying that they'd come and give a big keynote speech when we got to 200 members. And I thought to myself, that's great. We could get to 200 members. I could get 120 people to sign up tomorrow. But actually, are they committed or are they just ticking a box? And I would much rather have the people in this room to whom it really matters and who want to make a difference paying a relatively small amount to try and do their bit. So thank you all for that. I'm now going to fast forward on my slides and skip everything else, at least for the moment, that I was going to say. So forgive the flash forward on the slides because I am getting, some would say, to the most important part of the bit that I have to say. And that is to introduce the most important person in the room, at least in his own head. He is the Lord Holmes of Richmond, known also, and I'm sure today, as Chris. I put up some slides there, or some bullet points there, which tells you about this extraordinary individual. The most successful Paralympic swimmer, a passionate advocate for the potential of technology and the benefits of diversity and inclusion, campaigning for more accessible environments for disabled people, working to end the injustice of unpaid internships, member of the Select Committee on Artificial Intelligence, and has been a past member of the committees on digital skills, social mobility and financial exclusion. If that didn't make him suitable to be our keynote speaker, He was also a solicitor at Ashurst between 2002 and 2009. He also has, as I'm sure many of you have seen, a rather delightful dog called Lottie, who usually gets more attention than he does, but on this occasion I'm going to hand over the platform and the lectern to the Lord Holmes of Richmond. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Spectacularly average, got to say. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. More like it. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I'd like to thank Nicholas for that introduction. I'm sure he meant well. I was nervous before he introduced me, and I hope you'll be able to help me, to be honest. I'm having a bit of an identity crisis, and I just sense in this room there are people that can help me. And I'll tell you for why. I was working late in Parliament last year, had a late night, loads of votes, came out well after 11. I mean, I know that's not late for a law firm. Don't know why I'm saying it's late, really. So I came out well after 1 in the morning. And all I wanted to do was get in a cab and go home. Got in the back of the cab. The cabbie turns to me and says, "Good evening, Mr. Blunkett." I mean, I know it was late. I had a long day. Clearly, I need to use more Clinique. Other skin products are also available on the market. I said, "No, I'm not David Blunkett." He said, "Yes, you are. I recognise the dog." So I hope you can help me today. It is a pleasure to be here because essentially this is me. I'm a working class kid from the Midlands who is now in the House of Lords. I have absolutely no idea how that happened. I'm completely convinced it's the mother and father of all clerical errors. At any moment, someone's going to come and tap me on the shoulder and say the social experiment's over. But having said all of that, I have no idea how it's happened, but social mobility must be in there somewhere. So I just thought I'd share a little bit about my journey, some of the stuff I'm involved with, and do please keep in touch post this event. If you want to join me on Twitter at Lord C. Holmes, do feel free, because so much of the stuff I'm involved with is around innovation, inclusion, diversity, social mobility, talent. So very much all of your areas of interest, I hope. Otherwise, you've come to the wrong room and the signing meeting for your deal is on level 3. So how did it all start for me? As I say, I grew up in the Midlands, a small town far too close to Birmingham. Anybody here from Birmingham today? Starbridge will do it. I'm from Kiddie, mate. All right. We're a long way from home, mate. Exactly. But it's interesting. Normally when I'm presenting and asked that question, it's greeted by complete silence, even if I'm speaking in Birmingham. I went to what was described as the worst comprehensive in the county. I'd like to think that some of the things I did help to give it that reputation. And what was the level of aspiration, of ambition for me and my mates? Woodwork, metalwork, technical drawing, the same curriculum taught since the 1960s by many of the same teachers who taught it in the 1960s. If we were lucky, we'd get a job in one of the factories or foundries that were dotted around the West Midlands. Factories and foundries that were already foundering in post-industrial decline. But that was the level of ambition for us. There was one street in Kidderminster, one street that had stucco-fronted terraces. Gotta say, it took a long time since leaving Kidderminster for me to even know the word stucco-fronted. But that street, one street, had the private doctors, the accountants, and the lawyers. Me, my family, my mates, their families, We did not know any of these people who are up there in this space way above us as we did woodwork, metalwork and technical drawing. But even if that level of ambition, of aspiration for us wasn't that high, when I was 14, I went to bed one night, and when I woke up, I couldn't see. Lost my sight overnight. Not expected, not predicted. I could never imagine that I would have to face something like that in my life. And almost within those first few days and certainly weeks, no matter how low that level of aspiration was for the factory or foundry, that was gone. And almost immediately people started to treat me differently. You can't go back to that school. No blind people in mainstream education then. You can't go back to your swimming club. One of the best reasons given to me by the local authority why I couldn't go back to the swimming club was that I was a fire risk. Now, age 14, and at any point since, I've never felt like I'm about to spontaneously combust. But even if I was, there was 25 metres of water right there in terms of risk analysis. But those reasons were put there. And yet, I still had the 3 dreams in my heart. Yes, feeling smaller than they did before I lost my sight. But the 3 dreams I'd had since being really little, try and do A-levels, try and get to Cambridge University, and most importantly, try and represent Great Britain at sport. Those dreams still felt the same. They would have been difficult enough anyway. But how would I achieve one, never mind all 3 of them now? I knew I had to become the leader of my own life and crucially get so many people around me to help me, to support me in that mission. Teachers, swim coaches, friends, family, on and on. All of them helping me because I had to learn from scratch how to get about. Firstly with a white stick, latterly updated to the black fluffy, more deluxe version. How to read books. I'd learned to read in a normal way. Getting books on cassette tape. Now, if there's anybody in the audience under the age of 25, you'll have absolutely no idea what a cassette tape is. To make it clear for you, it's a really, 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 really disappointing version of iTunes. But that was the technology of the time. That technology enabled me to go back to that school, get my books, get my lessons on tape, and to carry on. I knew that age 14, and that's been a thread running through. The sense of enablement, of empowerment, always should be tied to the technology and the innovation of the day. 3 months later, I'm back at the school. 3 months later, back in the swimming pool. Luckily, get to swim all around the world. I go to Barcelona, and it's stunning to qualify, to represent your country at sport with a tracksuit, the flag on your chest. Unfortunately for me, my main rival was the local Spanish hero, Mr. Pablo Corral. 9,500 Spaniards cheering for Pablo. 50 Brits cheering for me. And I say cheering, they're actually quite a quiet crowd. Go Chris. You can do it. So it's all set against me. If Pablo wins, he'll get a $50,000 trust fund. If I win, I might get a new pair of Speedos. So we get to the final race, and amazingly, I've done 5 races, 5 gold medals, 3 European records, 2 world records. The final race, the 100 metres freestyle, the blue ribbon race, the one everybody wants to be in. It's the last race on the last evening of the games. The crowd are in party mood. It's an outdoor pool. The sun is beautifully bathing the crowd in sunshine. It's a wonderful competition venue. The Spanish royal family have come to present Pablo with his gold medal. And it's being shown live on Spanish TV. Pressure. Half an hour before the race, the last call room. A tiny room, 8 chairs, 8 swimmers, the final of the 100 metres freestyle. People trying to psych you out there. There was a fabulous Polish guy I raced against a lot. He just used to make really loud noises in there, which he thought was psyching other swimmers out. He didn't realise we all just thought it was quite funny. But pressure. walking out onto the pool deck in front of 10,000 people, standing behind the blocks, being introduced to the crowd, representing Great Britain, Chris Holmes. Yay! Lane 5 from Spain, Pablo Corral. Boom, this is their man, it's their moment. I close my mind to the noise, to everything, and just have one golden line straight down lane 4. As we're called to our marks, the one thought in my head is for every arm stroke, for every pull I'll take in that race, I would have swam 2 million metres in training. 2 million metres for every arm stroke. We get called to our marks and we're off. And the one point I remember, 75 metres done, 3/4 of the race done, 25 metres to go. Pablo's in the next door lane. I feel him come up on my shoulder. You'd think at that point I might have some deep sports psychology kind of thought. Maybe something to do with steel or fire. I can honestly say at that moment I felt him come up on my shoulder. I turned, breathed to my right, and the thought that came into my head was, I don't think so, mate. Just gave me that 1,000th of a degree to not feel legs bursting with lactic acid, to get into the final 5 metres, not feel lungs screaming for air, to not breathe for the final 5 metres, to reach, stretch, touch those Omega time pads. We both went fast in the heat. Luckily I got the touch. Luckily I got the gold medal by just under half a second. Great race to be part of, but equaling that, getting involved with London 2012 and bringing the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games back to London for the first time in 64 years. There's much I could say about this, but the best way to bring it to life, and the reason why I'm going to show you this film, is it really demonstrates so much about what we're about today and what we should be about all days. And that is the sense of taking a different lens on a problem, looking at something in a different way, seeing how it can be presented in a different way, looking about how it can be communicated, and through that communication connected with people, and through that change can happen. So let's take a look at this short film we made with Channel 4. "90 seconds, 18 months in the making, to completely reframe not only how people would think of the Paralympic Games, the possibility, the opportunity, but how people would think about disability and indeed diversity and inclusion in Britain. I show you that this afternoon because I believe that's all of our mission, really, to address that fundamental blight on our society since the beginning of time. Talent is everywhere, opportunity isn't. That's what we're about. I was lucky enough to have a career as a commercial lawyer. I went round for loads of interviews. I could tell within 30 seconds whether I was going to have any chance of getting the job, getting a training contract within 30 seconds, which had nothing to do with my academic or other abilities. Fabulous hats off to Ashurst Morris Crisp and to Roger Fimbo, who's here today, who was a graduate partner at Ashurst then, who not only gave me a training contract, but did it in such the right way, honest, open, communicative. Interviewed me, said, "We like you." I mean, mistake there, obviously, but you know, even the best systems can have a glitch. He said, "We like you. We like your paperwork. We want you to come and be part of Ashurst Morris Crisp. We've never had a blind lawyer. Tell us how we can make it possible. What do you need so you can be judged on the same start line as all of the other trainees who'll start at the same time as you?" And that's all that anybody should ask. Provide anybody with the opportunity to succeed and indeed, or to fail. That should be all of our businesses. To smash the silos, not just organisational, but even more importantly, the silos of thought. To look farther and to look harder for the talent. Because if we don't, be in no doubt, it's as simple as this, with the fourth industrial revolution already upon us, for organisations, become diverse or die. But it's such a fabulous opportunity when we need to be more creative as law firms, as any organisations. What you need is the brightest and the best talent from all the possible sources, regions, socio-economic groups. It's absolutely the business of today. It should be the business for all of us every day. Enabling, empowering other people to give of their best. And to finish with somebody far more eloquent than me, Gandhi. We find ourselves when we lose ourselves in the service of others. That's what we're about. It's a great mission. Thank you for everything you've done so far. Enjoy the rest of the day. Do please keep in touch with me, and let's make a difference to law. Let's make a difference to society. Let's take the opportunity to make Britain the country it can be. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, I can safely say it was a good decision to let him go first. Although, to be fair, I do have a slightly disturbing image of him in some Speedos holding a fire extinguisher, but I'll try and eliminate that. I'm hoping that if I do something, some slides will reappear, but if they don't, I'm very confident that an able person sitting at the back of the room will do something. So, whilst I'm waiting to get back into my slides, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we have been able to do over the course of the last year. You're getting a sneak preview of what I'm about to tell you, which is perfect, really. Okay, so thank you so much, person at the back of the room. So what have we done? We have changed, expanded, improved our governance of Prime, which we think is really important. So what we have done, thank you, what we have done particularly, just looking at that list of our current board members, is bring Bill Drummond of Brodie's and Ty Jones of DWF onto the board. Very, very keen that Prime is not seen, and I mean perception here because it absolutely isn't, but is not seen as being something for London, something for city lawyers. It absolutely isn't. This is a national initiative. And Bill and Ty are making a very serious commitment to that in their own regions, but very much as part of Prime. We have also brought onto the board Chris White of Aspiring Solicitors, who will be known to many of you, if not all of you. Extraordinary contribution to social mobility that Chris and Aspiring Solicitors have made in a short time, and really good for us to have the benefit of his thinking and contribution. And in addition, we have Julie Randalls, who was previously on the board as part of the Sutton Trust representative. She left the Sutton Trust, and they continue to be represented and contribute through Binder. And as CEO of Causeway Education, Julie continues to contribute to our discussions and thinking and progress, which is great. But alongside this, we've realised that it's not just what, forgive me, fellow board members, some relatively old people think about what we ought to be doing. It's really important that we're engaging with the younger generation. So what we have is a combination of things. We brought a number of firm representatives into some working groups, and they're really helping us in terms of delivering on some of the initiatives, and you'll be hearing about more of those during the course of the day, and I'll be mentioning some of the working group later, but thank you very much to all of those. If anybody is interested in participating, we cannot have enough volunteers, so please do put yourselves forward if you'd like to do so. And then to my previous point, we have advisory boards involving alumni and separately head teachers. One of the really important things about our success is engaging with the student population. Again, we can come up with our own thoughts as how to best to do that. We can get your thoughts on how best to do that, but really the people we should be asking about how best to do that are the students themselves and the head teachers. So again, those have been invaluable. And then on the bottom of this slide here, we have, in quotes, new administrator. And with the benefit of the new funding basis, we've been able to appoint this year Heather Stewart, who I can't readily see, but is here somewhere. And probably if she was listening, would stand up now. Oh, there she is at the back, waving. Thank you, Heather. Heather is our new administrator. She's already contributed a huge amount in terms of the research, the planning for this conference, and a great appointment. And she's going to be available to you as members as well as to the students. So that was the first bit. Just scaling back, what we did as we reconstituted was we issued a survey and you responded, we listened, and we've acted upon what you suggested we should be doing. And one of the things, which is the kind of standout thing in terms of visibility, is the new website. I'm hoping that everybody's seen it. I'm hoping everybody loves it. For those of you who have no idea what I am talking about, please do go back to your offices and check it out. But it was also what you were seeing scrolling at the beginning as we were all coming into the room. I think it's fantastic, and great thanks go to Stafford Long for their work on that. They did a brilliant job. What it does is it includes a best practice guide. It includes a lot of information, but what we've also done as part of the initiatives over the last year is develop a best practice guide as to how to set up and run good placement schemes. So if you haven't seen that, please do have a look at it. You may well read it and think, I do all of that. Never a bad thing to be told you're doing a good thing. You may read it and just take a couple of ideas out about refinements that you can have to your own scheme. What we'd like you to do as member firms, though, is showcase the great work that you're doing, because the students are definitely looking at. The hits have gone up significantly, and I've just lifted, without asking for her permission, a quote that Elizabeth Healy of HFW sent, which I think really speaks for itself, and that's the practical output. What we've got in this website is four hubs in one website, and they're very much tailored. So there's a piece for the parents, there's a piece for the students, there's a piece for the members, and there's a piece for the teachers. So actually we've just put in the information that is really, really important to them, and it's very, very intuitive, it's easy to follow, and actually I think they are really appreciating that. And then the other thing I should definitely mention, which we've obviously told you all about and we think is a material development for Prime, with the assistance of RARE, we have made CRS, contextual recruitment, available to all of our members. And that is a really, really important way of making sure we're reaching out to the right population and also making sure that we are tracking our success, because one of the things that historically Prime has not been great at is tracking success. And it's brilliant to be able to give statistics about the number of people that we have met, brought into our respective firms for schemes, placements, visits, etc., but tracking how they progress through their careers is really important. The recent survey that we have just commissioned, we haven't really analysed fully, but I just thought I'd give you some headlines. So first of all, thank you to the 42 firms, which is 64% of the members who responded to the survey. Slightly disappointingly, I would say, 95% of those are based in or have an office in London, some of the obviously regional national firms. Very much encourage everybody to participate in the surveys, because that's what helps us work out what's best for you as members of Prime. Of those, 41 of the 42 are offering Prime placements in 2017, which is great to hear. I'm not going to go through all of this as we're running a little bit late, but there's some real positivity in terms of that feedback, the positivity that the students are getting out of being engaged in the Prime schemes that you are all offering. And also that last one, quite interesting, some of the other benefits that you get from offering Prime placements. So not only the recruitment and retention of some of the best talent in the country, but also those subsidiary benefits, which I think are important to bear in mind. Just touch upon these next three bullets, because I think we may be exploring some of these during the roundtable sessions. They're quite compelling statistics in some respects. So 62% of those who responded to the survey said that they faced challenges during their placement programs, particularly including the sourcing of students and also the recruiting, which possibly means the persuading of staff to participate in the programme. 19% of your collective trainees went through the Prime programme. I guess people will react slightly different to that. Some people will think that's quite good, 1 in 5. Some people will think that's a little bit disappointing. For me, it is what it is. It's a statement of fact, and what it importantly is a benchmark against which we can measure our progress and success. So very much hoping that that percentage continues to rise, and we will continue with the survey process. And then this one is obviously important. Over 80% of you want Prime's help to measure the impact of programmes. So we touched upon that already in some of the things I've said. It was very much a topic of the roundtable this morning. Data monitoring, tracking, and are we actually making a difference? So I'm very much inviting you to talk about that in the roundtables later this afternoon. One of the other things that's on the website are case studies, and I would really encourage you as member firms to volunteer your case studies. They're really, really powerful. Why do we have them? I've put some answers up there. They're self-explanatory. They're real-life stories. This is about real-life people. It's not just marketing speak. And they're definitely an inspiration and an encouragement to future Prime students who see them and see, actually, that could be me, or that sounds like me. They give other members ideas as to how they can run their schemes. And parents and teachers begin to realise that actually a possibility of a career in the law is a real one for people that they know. And they're good news stories, and we should be proud of what we're achieving, and you absolutely should be proud of what you're achieving. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples we've taken from the website already. Goldie was a student on Trowers and Hamlin's 2016 Prime programme. Recently successfully applied to the firm's Aspire Award, currently studying at Bristol University, and Trowers are providing her with a bursary, a mentor, and a place on their summer vacation. I mean, that's a really good example of what we're trying to achieve, and a practical example. So congratulations obviously go to Goldie, but also to Trowers and Hamlin's. And then another one, Ellen, spent a week with Brodie's on their Prime programme when she was 17. And it's this experience that opened her eyes to a possibility of a career in law. She's now studying law at the University of Edinburgh, and Brodie's have built a strong relationship with her, keeping in touch throughout her degree and offering her a place on the annual summer vacation programme. Without that original week's placement when she was 17, she probably wouldn't even considered a career in the law. So that is, again, another compelling story, and I think I'm right in saying that Ellen may even be with us today. So welcome, Ellen, and good luck. So really good examples. I'm not going to talk about the Social Mobility Index, but obviously the whole area of social mobility received a great degree of attention and focus last year as a result of the inaugural Social Mobility Index. We have 2 speakers later talking about that. I'm just going to remind you now that this year's is already being launched. I'm definitely going to do my personal encouragement of you to participate in it. And this is not just so we can get lots of law firms in the top 50 or whatever the number is in the table. That's obviously good. But it's because one of the things that you get out of participating is feedback. You will hear what the Social Mobility Foundation think about what you're doing. You can participate on an anonymised basis as well. But the feedback is tailored, so it really, really is an important opportunity to get the benefit of that learning. So with that, I'm going to start handing over to other people to take our conference forward today. The agenda really is to hear the different perspectives from people that we have on our panels and speaking to us, but also from each other, and to share thoughts about what our priorities should be for Prime going forward. And just as Chris was saying, and as I said at the beginning, to work out how we can continue to make a difference and how we can continue to change the profession and the lives of those to whom we are reaching out in a very, very positive way. So again, once again, thank you for what you're doing. And I'm going to not talk about Lord Holmes of Richmond. He's had way too much coverage already. And I am going now to move to the next section, which is our panel session. And I am absolutely thrilled to begin to convene our panel, who I thought were very interested, but people are already walking out, so it's not going well. Fortunately, you're looking at me and you can't see that half the audience is already gone. But hey, relax, it'll be fine. So, as you will see from the screen, to facilitate this session, I am thrilled to be able to welcome to the stage Funke Abimbola, MBE. Funke is not only, as you will see, the General Counsel and Company Secretary of Roche, She is also a personal friend. She is truly extraordinary. She is fully and fundamentally committed to social mobility, to diversity and inclusion, to levelling the playing field and to making a difference. She is Funke Abimbola MBE. She received that quite properly in the Queen's Birthday Honours List in 2017 for services to diversity in the legal profession and services to young people. I could carry on talking about her, but obviously this is a panel session and not just about Funke, so I'm now going to hand over to Funke and she will take over. Thank you, Funke.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. Just want to make sure everyone's got their mics on so we can hear us. Can you hear me all? Can you all hear me? Wonderful. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So passionate about levelling the playing field, as Nicholas very kindly alluded to. And I'm going to introduce our illustrious panel. We're really delighted to have these four wonderful individuals joining us today. So we've got from my right onwards, Anika Hendrick, who's the Head of Corporate Partnerships at Birkbeck University of London. Do you want to tell us a bit more about you before I move on?
Sure. Can you hear me? All right. Yes, I believe some of you might have been expecting Professor David Latchman. As you can see, I'm not him. He's unfortunately not here today, and I will be taking his place. So I work very closely with Professor Latchman and other colleagues around the college to make sure that we are working as closely with business as we can, with knowledge exchange, with helping them to attract and to train and to retrain their talented individuals, and most importantly, helping businesses to make the most of the social mobility opportunities that Birkbeck can offer, and helping firms to really ensure that those individuals who don't come from privileged backgrounds are able to make the most of what they have to offer.
So a really good example there of how academia can have a really important part to play in this. And then moving on to Lynn Proctor, who is the founder of LPR Associates. So tell us a bit more about you, Lynn.
Okay, so I've worked in non-selective state schools for about 11 years, really pushing this agenda of young people from less advantaged backgrounds getting access into top professions, top universities. Obviously that includes law. I've had quite a lot to do with the Prime initiative. I work with a number of law firms actually getting their programme of work experience up and running, as well as other organisations. I've worked with RARE quite a lot, and so with lawyers in schools. So I think that whole agenda about bringing the law into the school and young people out into law and beyond is really important to me. I think what I'm hoping that I can bring is a perspective around what works realistically for young people. I've worked with some amazing, fantastic young people who just needed a little more of a rung on the ladder. They just needed those little bits closer together at the beginnings, and then they can fly. And really anything that we can do to make that happen will benefit us all.
Wonderful, thank you, Lynn. Moving swiftly on to Nicholas Millen. Nicholas is the CEO at the Bridge Group. Do you want to tell us a bit more about you, Nicholas?
Yes, thank you. And I should start by apologising for the misleadingly youthful photograph that's staring rather in a rather sinister way at me here. This was taken before my wife and I had 2 children, so deep apologies for trying to mislead you. So as Funke mentioned, I'm Chief Executive at the Bridge Group. We're based at King's College London. We're a policy association that researches and promotes socioeconomic diversity, particularly in the professions. We work closely, for example, with Chris and colleagues at the Civil Service, with the BBC and with a range of accountancy firms. And you'll hear from Malcolm at Grant Thornton a bit later. We recently have done fairly significant pieces of research into the legal sector. So, for example, we've just completed an evaluation of Pathways Plus, the Sutton Trust programme. We were commissioned last year by the Solicitors Regulation Authority to look at the ways in which the proposed reforms to qualification might affect diversity. And we're currently in the midst of a fascinating project with a consortium of 8 law firms, all of whom I think are in the room, looking at early career progression amongst trainees and how background characteristics such as socio-economic background and ethnicity and gender might affect that. So we have between us, my colleagues and I, interviewed hundreds of aspirant and current professionals in the legal sector and are in the midst of crunching about 2.5 million data points on this topic.
Me. Very busy time for you. And last, by no means least, I'm really delighted to introduce you to Megan. Now, Megan is a future trainee at Hogan Lovells. We're rather proud of our Megan because Megan's a really good example of what can happen and the impact that Prime has in a very real way. So do you want to tell us a bit more about you?
Yeah, so I am feeling a little bit out of my depth sat on this panel, I must admit.
Don't be fooled. Don't be fooled.
We're all winging it, Megan.
We're all
don't worry.
pretending.
Oh,
Don't
very
worry.
nice.
We'll come back to that.
Yeah, so I'm a final year law student at the University of Nottingham. I come from a widening participations background, a small village in rural Nottinghamshire. I'm the first in my family to attend university, and I attended a very failing comprehensive school throughout my A-levels. I got involved in Pathways to Law during my A-levels, and then Pathways to Law Plus when I attended university. As a result of this, I then got onto a vacation scheme at Hogan Lovells, and as you mentioned, I've now accepted a training contract here, and when I finish my degree, I'll be taking a little bit of time out and then starting my LPC in 2019.
Wonderful. In fact, one of the questions I'm going to move on to is what we see as being one of the successes. And I have to say that Megan is a really good example of what this is all about. Before I move on to the questions, though, I was slightly disheartened towards the end of last year, I must say, about social mobility. And that was because we all heard in the headlines about how Alan Milburn and seemingly the whole Social Mobility Commission had resigned because of their frustration that Theresa May had shown a lack of commitment to the whole agenda. But I was really encouraged when I then saw the recent top 50 employers listed in the Social Mobility Index, because we'll hear about that later on. But there are a number of law firms on that list. I thought, actually, within the profession, we're doing a really, really good job. So, Megan, as one of our success stories, can you tell us a bit more about why it worked so well for you on a personal level?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I come from a widening participations background. None of my parents went to university, and also throughout school there wasn't any sort of exposure to the legal profession. And therefore, at the age of 16, when I went in to do my A-levels and I decided that I wanted to go to university to study law, I had an idea, but I didn't have any means of getting onto that first step of the ladder, which is what we're always talking about. And for me personally, the reason that a lot of people from widening participations backgrounds don't go into these professional careers, it's not because of lack of ability, it's just because of lack of opportunity and lack of self-belief. And for me personally, nobody I knew had gone into a professional career. I didn't know any lawyers, nobody at school had the same aspirations as me. And therefore, getting involved with the Pathways to Law programme at the age of 16 really opened my eyes to all the different possibilities that were out there. And Pathways to Law programme it's very broad. At the age of 16, you go and you look at family law, you look at criminal law, you look at the barrister route and the solicitor route, and you get a taste of commercial law as well. And therefore really opened my eyes to all the different possibilities that were out there, and really sort of ignited my passion and my drive. And for me personally, it sort of showed a goal for me to work towards, and because I had this goal, it made me work a lot harder through school in order to get the grades to then get to university, and work continually through Pathways to Law Plus when I got to university in order to secure a training contract at a prestigious firm. And I'm a strong believer that none of that would have been possible if it wasn't for these social mobility schemes, and I would not be sitting here today if it wasn't for the social mobility schemes that I got involved in.
We could just stop right there, couldn't we? I mean, that says it all, doesn't it? But I do need to give an opportunity to my fellow co-panellists. So do enlighten us a bit more, Lynn and Anika, about your examples of specific success stories around this.
Yeah, and I think, well, in one of my roles, actually, I took we worked with a firm that actually doesn't exist anymore. We worked with S.J. Berwin, and we actually had 10 students every year that went and did their prime work experience. And I think for me, what was so brilliant about that was that these young people got an opportunity to experience a range of jobs, actually. And there's one girl, Amy, who sticks in my mind, who's now doing a marketing degree at Bristol University. And in fact, she said the best thing about it was not because she necessarily wanted to become a lawyer, but that she could see all the different things that she could do within a law firm that weren't necessarily anything to do with law. So she's actually going on she's doing a geography degree, but she wants to get into marketing, and actually she'll be brilliant at that. And that was her sort of launch pad. She was the first person in her family to go to university, and she just made it feel that it was possible. And I think if I had to give to young people who perhaps don't have those contacts, don't have the things that perhaps some of us take for granted, if I could just give them that confidence that makes them believe that they can sit at that table, any table that they want to sit at, then that's what you would give them. And things like coming on work experience, even just coming to visit an office such as this, it's amazing the impact it can have on young people. You know, literally, if you walk into an office like this with a group of young people, whether they're in year 7, year 10, year 12, they will look and they just go, wow, miss, I want to work here. And I think that's a really, really powerful thing that we can do very easily, actually. That doesn't cost a lot of money. And I think that that's what we need to do, because these young people don't know what they don't know, and we need to help them really as much as we can.
The impact of the office, and I won't point out which young lady from my team is in the audience with us today, but the impact of the office was really strong on her as well, and very, very motivating. So we can never underestimate how impactful that office experience really can be for our young people. But how's the view from Birkbeck and all this?
Sure.
Anika?
So there are a couple of points that I wanted to raise about some of the real successes that I see within the legal sector around social mobility. So as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the main parts of my job is to work with organisations to help them to achieve their ambitions around social mobility. And at its very core, social mobility is essentially firms who are looking to gain access to the widest range of talent that they can. And it's about a commitment to drawing on all of the different types of expertise, experience, perspectives that people from all different backgrounds can bring. And it's so important to consider that social mobility, it's not just an issue of this is something for social good. It's good for business. We all need to be doing it. It's important for firms to look to social mobility and look to candidates who are coming from underrepresented backgrounds to be able to help them understand their clients better, to be able to help understand communities better, to understand staff better. So it's really, really, really good for business. And one thing that I absolutely love that I'm seeing in the sector here is the extent to which senior figures within the industry are committed to this. Yeah. In so many industries, I won't name any, but you often see social mobility, diversity, focus exclusively on the wonderful work that CSR departments do. And what's absolutely fantastic with all of the colleagues and teams that we see around here today is the commitment that you have from your senior leadership. We have the example of Nicholas here, and then there's a personal example close to Birkbeck in Simon Davis. He's going to become president of the Law Society, and he's also on the governing body of Birkbeck. So it's so important to ensure that this is a top-down effort and that everyone's really getting involved. The second area that I feel like the legal sector is doing such great work is around the message to people who are coming from underrepresented backgrounds. As I said, Birkbeck, we focus on access. We're a research-intensive university, but one of our core missions is access to higher education, making sure that it's not only for those who are rich enough to afford it and who are privileged enough. It's also about making sure that it's open to everyone. And our key message is, we are open to you, people of London, people of the UK, people from around the world. We are open to welcoming you. You are welcome here. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what your experience is. It doesn't matter how old you are. And it's wonderful to see this as well within the legal sector, that you are saying, we are open to you. If you have the skills and experience and you have the drive, then come to us and we will help you make your career. And it's great to see the work, for example, of Chris. I can see you up there from Aspiring Solicitors and how he's working with you all, and Rare Recruitment, and the wonderful work of Prime as well, to ensure that people from all kinds of backgrounds, such as Megan. I mean, we need people like Megan. Megan is good for business, and that's what it's fantastic to see, and that we hope to see more of.
That makes me want to go back to university and do another degree just to experience the whole Birkbeck experience, actually. But Nicholas, how about from you? What successes have you seen?
Yeah, I think I'm also sort of reflecting on this, having reviewed all of the social mobility index submissions as well. I mean, it feels to me like the legal sector is the sector where this is most on the agenda, and it has been for a larger number of years than in most other sectors. So I think the fact that the sector and individual firms are talking about it, and you're having events like this, is in a sense the first step to enlightenment. I would encourage, though, in that narrative for the sector to consider a couple of things. One is increasingly the firms we work with, we're finding really intimate intersections between socioeconomic diversity and other diversity strands, like gender diversity, for example, and like diversity by ethnic group. So increasingly, and there'll be many firms in the room who are doing this, thinking of socioeconomic diversity as a distinct strand, I've come to conclude is actually deeply unhelpful. So I would encourage you to think about that. And the other is, and the legal sector shares this with every sector we work with, the dominant narrative is about supporting someone fantastically talented like Megan into the current system and its dominant cultures, rather than actually also, and these two things are not mutually exclusive, reflecting on whether the dominant cultures properly enable people from underrepresented backgrounds to thrive. So the positive thing is there, it's on the agenda, it's being spoken about thoughtfully, reflectively, the data is being looked at. Two other sort of more minor points. The second is we know when it comes to sectors, collaborative action is deeply important. And I turn to our colleagues in the accountancy sector for this. In Access Accountancy, for example, which I'm sure Malcolm will reference later, all of the firms submit their data to us. And we then benchmark them against each other anonymously, so they can make sense of their data and understand how they look compared to their peers. It's going from being in a room like this to developing those more purposeful collaborative activities. And I think the fact you're focusing largely, at least, on work experience here is fantastic. All of the research shows that actually, as Megan, I think, was describing, it's work experience that makes the biggest difference. When we look at research about information, advice and guidance in schools, it's criminal that increasingly more and more schools, Lynn, you'll have a view on this, I'm sure, are stopping work experience when all the evidence says that makes much more difference than sitting opposite even a very, very talented careers advisor. And then finally, just to build on Anika's point, it is absolutely fantastic that really the most senior colleagues like Nicholas are deeply engaged and thoughtful about this topic. What we often find with employers is that at the very senior levels, there is a really strong investment in diversity and inclusion. Similarly, at the very junior levels, particularly around entry-level hiring, often the people we need to win over are those sort of middle and senior managers who are on their route to partner, for whom one might argue there is most to lose on this agenda. And let's be honest and frank about that, and I'm primarily talking about affluent white men. We need to engage that community in this conversation so they do not feel they're being done upon. Yes. Let's have that conversation, not dismiss some of the comments we might hear from that community.
And these are some of the challenges we have, of course, because when you're trying to drive change, and I'm really pleased you touched on that, Nicholas, it can lead to resentment. It can lead to the overrepresented group feeling threatened that they're somehow going to lose out. But a very well-known female barrister, I won't name her name, gave me a quote about that whole theme and said, actually, all you end up doing is wheedling out very mediocre white men. So the true talent rises to the top. So I'll leave that out there. Very, very divisive language. Not my quote, but I'll leave that with you all. So when we're talking about challenges then, what more can we be doing to try and drive this change? I mean, Megan, from your point of view, you're a great success story around this. Is there anything from your point of view that you think we could be doing more of to help?
I think the main issue surrounding social mobility schemes is actually getting the word out there. So from a personal perspective, when I got to university and I spoke to my peers and I said, I got involved in Pathways to Law and Pathways to Law Plus, and I did this, this and this, the response was always, wow, that sounds amazing. I wish I'd have known about something like that, or I wish I would have gotten involved in something like that. And I think the main way to get the word out there is actually to get it out there through the schools. So the fact of the matter is, at the age of 16, you're not researching on the internet what social mobility schemes are out there that I could get involved in order to further my career prospects when I'm 20 or 21, because you've got more important things on your mind at the age of 16. So for me personally, it was through school, and we had a careers officer who was really good, and he pointed it out to me, you did well in your GCSEs, I think this is something that you might be interested in looking into. And that's how I got to know about the scheme. And that was kind of just a stroke of luck, and from there I took it into my own hands and I applied for other schemes and got involved and took the most of every opportunity that I had. But without that first prompt onto the ladder, I don't think I would have applied for the schemes. I wouldn't have known that they actually existed. So in terms of challenges, I think the main thing is actually advertising, liaising with schools, especially those schools that are situated in, deprived areas, failing comprehensive schools, non-selective schools, and letting students know and parents know that these social mobility schemes are out there and actually how helpful they are. Because obviously if you don't know about them, you can't apply and then you can't benefit.
Yes, no, that's really the visibility point of the opportunities, and that they're easy to find as well for students. It's very important. I mean, Nicholas, you touched on a very important point around intersectionality, where you can't look at separate diversity strands. You do need to look at this as a whole. But do you see any other specific challenges around this?
Yeah, where to start? I think picking up on Nicholas's point earlier, I think evidence of impact, actually, I mean, you share this with most other sectors, running the data to generate evidence of impact. So an example of this, I think, to pick up on Anika's point as well, our strong view based on the data we've seen is that A-level grades are a pretty good predictor for performance on the job, and I would invite you to challenge anyone who might say otherwise. But they're an even better predictor when they're considered in the context in which they were achieved. That's what our research to date is beginning to show. Part of that research was undertaken with Grant Thornton. So I think what I want to understand is how firms are using that contextual data and whether it's actually making a difference, frankly. And I'm sure there are many firms in the room and colleagues at RARE who are interrogating that now if they haven't before. But let's smoke out that evidence of impact so we start to know what works. And then two other minor points, if I may, jump in if I'm monopolising. Internships we come up against over and over again. And I know this is sort of without the purview of Prime, at least at the moment. You will know that internships are such a fundamental part of the pipeline into the legal profession. So in the legal sector, 60% of interns who bag an intern, sometimes now, of course, it's in their first year at university, 60% convert into hires. At the firm, they were hired as an intern. So that's 3 in 5. In investment banking, it's 2 in 5, for example. And when we've looked at the diversity characteristics of people undertaking internships, guess what? It's deeply unrepresentative. And so we also experience some firms having, I think, a disproportionate focus on grad hiring without properly also interrogating their internship programs as part of that pipeline. And something very practical, for example, firms could do is make a commitment to ring-fencing a certain proportion of their internship places to those candidates who you know are underrepresented in your firm, as the civil service does. And then my final point is around sort of progression in the firm and dominant cultures and making sure everyone can get ahead when they're there. But maybe I'll park that for now.
That's important, because that's the inclusion point, which is the other element, of course, to getting this right. So from your point of view, Lynn, I mean, there's a couple of pieces of research that you mentioned to me earlier that you wanted to share in terms of challenges. So what do those highlight?
Okay, so the first piece of research, which actually underpins everything that I've been doing in employer engagement, is Dr. Anthony Mann's research for Education Employers Task Force when he was there. He's now at the OECD, which effectively said that as a young person, if you had just 5 employee engagements throughout your secondary school career, that's just 5 coming to an office like this. Work experience obviously is fantastic, but it could just be meeting somebody in a careers fair. You are 7 times less likely to become NEET, not in education, employment or training, and you're likely to earn around 18% more when you finally join the workforce. So that's incredibly powerful, just those meeting of people who you don't know. They're not a member of your family, not a member of school. And actually, the more of those experiences that you have, you become exponentially more qualified, as you can imagine yourself. I think the piece that really strikes home to me is the work that Dr. Stephen Jones did about 3 years ago. He's at Manchester University, and he did a piece of research looking at access to top universities. If you went to a non-selective state school like Megan and the ones that I've worked at, and you are a year 13 student and it's September and you're applying to university and you have the same GCSE grades, bearing in mind this was 3 years ago, so the same AS grades and the same predicted A-level grades, you were 30% less likely to get an offer at a top university than if you went to an independent school. And the reason for that was very simple. It was either that you didn't have experience of the world of work, or if you did, you didn't know how to reflect on it. And that is a real problem, I still think. And I think that also brings into this issue that Megan raised about applying. So it's all very well for young people to be told, please apply for these things. But I've spent a lot of my time with young people helping them to apply for things. Even a very simple form is enough to put off young people. I mean, they find it very difficult to identify what we would class as employability skills. I had £1 for every young man that sat in front of me wanting advice, and I would say to them, well, come on, Magdi, tell me when you've used teamwork skills. Oh, I haven't really done that, miss. Well, don't you play in the football team? Oh, yes, does that count? I mean, if I had to, if I'd get £1, I wouldn't need to work. So I think there is something about making people, particularly from less advantaged backgrounds, aware of some of those fantastic skills that they have. Maybe they pick up their little brother or sister from school every Wednesday. They don't see the value in that. Maybe they help at the church. They don't see the value in that. So I think there's a lot that we can do to help those young people. And I do think that application process, and if I just may, on that note, that's particularly relevant now as these degree apprenticeships come in. The very young people who should benefit from that are not going to be the young people that will benefit from that. It's the white middle-class parents who've thought, oh, good, my child can go and do accountancy or law and everything will be paid for because I can help them. What are we going to do to make sure that those things are actually given to the young people that really deserve them and will benefit most from them?
That touches on a real issue there again, doesn't it? Because it's almost a mindset point that you're getting at there, Lynn, where if you're not even thinking about your experience as being applicable for a form, then what do you put down? And then you're sifted out even at that stage. What have you seen, Anika, in terms of, and let's try and keep it fairly brief, because we know there have been a lot of challenges around this.
All right, no problem.
If you possibly can.
Of course, there's just 2 points that I really want to raise.
Sure.
So the first one is, obviously we're aware there aren't that many training contracts out there, and it's completely understandable that so many firms will focus on the Russell Group for recruitment into their training contracts. I guess my hope and advice would be, where possible, do try and cast your nets wider. Do look to the post-92 institutions. Do look to institutions that have a strong widening access mission, and do consider institutions such as Birkbeck which focus on the slightly older learner. We do see, with the vast majority of our student population, they're not coming to us at 18. For whatever reason, they weren't encouraged by their families, they had caring responsibilities, they didn't have the confidence, they didn't have the social capital to consider university. So don't forget about the older learners. They have so much to bring, they have so much experience, and they have so much knowledge that they can bring to a role that perhaps younger students aren't able to bring. So don't forget them. And second of all, we would love to see greater commitment, and this is from academia and also from business, to social mobility within the academic community. So it's very, very expensive to go to university. The further you go up the chain, the more expensive it gets. And when we look at PhD candidates and postdoctoral candidates, you don't see a great deal of diversity there. And how can young people really feel like they're in touch with their lecturer, and the lecturer understands what they're looking to do and understands where they're coming from, and will encourage them unless they are people who are coming from similar backgrounds and where they can see some synergy with the kind of challenges that they're also facing. So that would be my 2 main points.
So again, we can never move away from funding, can we, in some way, which underlies all of this. Opportunities often linked to having the finances to do certain things, or to get the support, or to get the encouragement, or whatever it might be. You touched on a really, really good point there about the higher up you go, the less likely, people are going to be able to afford to do the degrees, etc. So it becomes a lot tougher. So if you had a magic wand, Anika, what would you want to change? What would you introduce to revolutionise this whole area?
Well, I'm going to refer to something that Nick actually said when he gave the oration at our Foundation Day dinner, and he made a comment which is, we need more Birkbeck. And this is something that we really, really strongly believe.
Trademark.
Yeah, absolutely. We see that the government is consistently talking about lifelong learning, portfolio careers, how people are going to have to change careers, how they're going to have to constantly be upskilling. And yet we don't see the same commitment coming from the halls of Whitehall, when it comes to realistic and concrete propositions. When the master of Birkbeck goes and talks to politicians, they say, yes, we understand about part-time learning, that's very important. And the next time you see them on television, it's exclusively 18-year-olds that are going to university at 18 to do 3-year degrees. So what we would love to see is for colleagues within this industry to advocate this is important, that part-time education is important, that lifelong learning is important, and make sure that people who don't have the opportunity to go at 18 are not left behind, that they do have opportunities and they do have the opportunity to be socially mobile. And if business works with us on this, then we would hope to see some change.
So it's that more agile way of looking at it as well, not being so rigid in terms of the path, and being a lot more agile about what the candidate looks like, what the student looks like, and so on. And I really like that. So that's a call to action for many of us in this room, I think it's fair to say, to really challenge some of the thinking around that, around who we're taking on, who we're seeing as high potential, potentially, and to really look at, looking outside the box around that. So from your point of view, Lynn, then, if you had this magic wand, and again, we're speaking, hypothetically, what would you want to see change?
I think that I would like to feel that every young person could have those 5 or more employer engagements so that they can realise their own potential, they can start to build their own brand, work out what's right for them, the things that they enjoy, the things that they're good at, that actually could translate into a meaningful job, whatever that should be. And that success is not just about how much you earn, it's also about what you give back, as was discussed earlier. And I think it's just moving to that. I think there's so much potential in our young people, but it can be a very frightening world for them. Can we just make that sound more exciting for them, I think?
No, that's a really, really good point. It's funny, the point you make about how much you earn, because I do a lot of talks to young people. A couple of weeks ago, I was speaking at a secondary school in Hertfordshire, and one of the questions that they asked was, how much do I earn? Because, for all that I'm talking about how great the profession is and how we have great organisations like Prime and aspiring solicitors, miss, if you're not earning enough money, I'm not interested. So, there we go. Very, very blunt from one of our young people in the audience. So, Nicholas, magic wand, what would you do?
I think the answer to that question about income is as much as makes me happy. I think there are some quite practical things that can be done. So ring fencing, colleagues may agree or disagree with me. Ring fencing internship places is something quite practical. Lynn, I loved your point about actually the real value of the work experience is in the way that the young person then articulates their experience, as we see that over and over again, actually. And I think students from more affluent backgrounds typically just become better rehearsed at that.
Absolutely.
But if I may, I'm going to put my magic wand to one side and sound a bit like a politician and say, actually, this is about a sort of holistic approach. There is no magic bullet. Of course, if there were, Prime would have shot the gun some years ago. But I would really encourage colleagues in the room to think about what happens when these candidates arrive at your firms, because the rewards of diversity will only be realised if there's a sort of commensurate investment in inclusion. So we're interviewing lots of partners at the moment and asking them what makes a good trainee, and you start with rather vague phrases like, well, they're bright, and well, what's that a synonym for? And people will talk about intellectual curiosity, but they'll also talk about things like confidence and gravitas and poise, etc. And we must remember that those things are contextual. I feel deeply comfortable in some environments and I'm quite outgoing. Others make me feel deeply uncomfortable if I'm unfamiliar with them, and I become much more introverted. So actually, when we put value and currency on things like extroversion and being outgoing, engaging a client, we just need to also reflect on whether the dominant cultures in our firms enable everyone to exercise that.
That's a really good point around leadership styles as well. In fact, I was talking to someone at work about this yesterday. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Myers-Briggs, and how it seems that if you're a high E, so extroversion to your point, you're far more likely to be more visible, have that outward confidence, and therefore you're more likely to be promoted and all the rest of it. I think that's a really valid point, that we need to look out for different ways of seeing potential, which may not be so obvious, may not be so in your face. Often the more confident people aren't really, it can be a lot of hot air from my experience. So no, that's a really, again, another call to action around that. Let's look in very different ways at what this talent could look like coming through the pipeline. So you've now got the magic wand, Megan. What would you do?
I think for me, again, speaking sort of from a personal perspective and mentioning the statistics that we spoke about earlier, I think that there needs to be more of a focus on regional law firms and expanding social mobility outside of London. So I come from a little village in rural Nottinghamshire. We've got a co-op at a pub, and that's about it, and not much else. And therefore, you can imagine trying to go into commercial law and, thinking about even moving down to London when, most of my immediate family live within a 2-mile radius is something that's very daunting. And I don't think I would have had the nerves to do something like this and, to apply for London firms if it wasn't for the social mobility schemes, They did a lot of events that are based in London because a lot of the law firms are based in London. So I've been coming down to London a few times a year for the past few years, and that means that I'm more comfortable with the city now, but that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for these social mobility schemes. And equally, it would have been nice to have been able to be involved in more work experience placements within regional firms, within Nottingham, Birmingham, Leeds, and these cities that do have offices, but not to the same extent as we do in London. And I think that a lot of rural areas are generally within sort of the Midlands, East Midlands, and the north of Britain. And a lot of people are lacking in opportunity simply because the infrastructure isn't there, and a lot of it is concentrated in London. So if we could expand the firms that Prime has and that these social mobility schemes get involved with to regional firms, then people might be more encouraged to take that first step onto the ladder and then obviously progress from there.
The north-south divide does still exist, unfortunately. There were a number of news stories, highlighting some of the deep injustices around this. Just in the last couple of weeks, children in the northeast are falling behind other parts of the country. For example, according to a report that came out from the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. Again, lots of stories around that. Yorkshire Post also put out a not dissimilar story. And, having volunteered my time with Speakers for Schools to speak, as do many other speakers, they always say they struggle to get speakers to go to the Midlands and to the north of the country. There are great speakers in these parts of the country. I don't know what the issue is. So, again, if you do have regional offices, wonderful partners who are inspiring, think about how we can push things out in the region so that our young people, north of Birmingham, don't lose out on this wonderful exposure that seems to be really concentrated in the south. So let's think even bigger now. Let's think about how, if we as an industry have got it absolutely right, how can we try and scale that up for other industries? Because I see a real commitment from the legal profession around this. Is there more we could be doing with our clients, for example, to try and drive some of that change, or other people that we might work with? What are your thoughts, Anika?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work quite closely with a number of law firms. For example, Allen & Overy. Do we have Allen & Overy here? Maybe not. So we work very closely with them on a project that looks to support people who come from backgrounds that have essentially no access to higher education, and that is forced migrants and particularly asylum seekers. And we set up a project with them whereby we actively seek out and encourage people from these communities to help them come to university and to fund them through their first year of university. And this is an example where Allen & Overy have actually gone to their partners and to their clients and had that discussion. Wonderful. This is such a fantastic initiative. We've got 3 law students coming through on this programme. Yes, it's a CSR initiative, but there are 1 or 2 that are definitely going to be good enough to go on to training contracts. And it's been fantastic because it's really galvanised support, not only from the legal sector, but we also have a bank on board, we have a consultancy on board, we have a couple of high net worth individuals that have committed to supporting the project. So absolutely, I feel where firms are involved with projects and they're working well, speak to your clients, individuals and firms as well, talk about what you're doing, talk about why it's working so well for you, and encourage them to do the same.
And it's also seen as an added value piece. I mean, for any of us who are marketeers or like to have a bit of a PR spin to the whole thing, it does a lot to consolidate relationships when you seem to be partnering in many, many ways beyond maybe your core offering to that client. So how about you, Lynn? What would you say we could do more of?
Yeah, I think that point about using clients is important, and it also goes to Megan's point that you might have clients that are actually not based in London, and that will help spread the net around the country a lot more. I think the other thing I would say is if people to give a week's work experience is a tough ask actually for lots of you. You all know if you've organised it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to do it well. But actually, most firms could offer shadowing for a day, just follow somebody around. That's really not a big call. So I think about other ways that you can engage with young people, back to these employer engagements that don't necessarily require a huge amount of resource or time. And then what happens from that is people have a good experience within your firm. And one of the things that was sort of touched on by Nicholas earlier was also actually how it can really benefit your own workforce. You know, one of the things, I've been running a mentoring campaign with PwC for many years, and actually one of the reasons they do it is because the people that are the mentors really, really enjoy it. And actually they've had a horrible week with grotty clients, and all of a sudden maybe the best thing they get that week is from their mentee that says, just got a place at Liverpool University or whatever, and I'm the first in my family to go. And that might be the best thing that happens to them all week. So I think there is a benefit within firms to help your staff. But I would say start small and do it well, actually, and learn from other people.
So again, another benefit is the employee engagement piece. You see, there's so many elements and strands to all this, and there are many ways. I mean, I was inspired by Aspiring Solicitors Commercial Awareness Programme, which we've now brought in. You've got a mini version within our own organisation where I work, which is a way of tying up all sorts of strands, getting lots of school children in. They'll be judged, they'll have to deal with a case study. So thank you very much for that piece of inspiration. But there are so many ways in which we can really try and build on this and galvanise. Do you have any more thoughts, Nicholas, around this? Of course he does.
Thank you for that preface. Yeah, I think your question was about how the legal sector might help inspire and influence others.
Let's scale this up.
Yeah, so I think the collaboration that is at the heart of Prime is exemplary. The number of firms that are engaged in, as you described earlier, sort of meaningful ways. It's not just a glossy website, it's much more than that. Although I do think what the sector can begin to gift to other sectors is evidence. It's very hard to engage with another sector unless you've got the evidence of what's working. And I rather tediously, I'm afraid, refer back to the data. I mean, using the data to sort of understand what's going on, what is the real barrier? Are students not applying to very elite law firms, or are they applying and not getting in? Is a very simple question that not every firm I talk to can answer. Using data to drive your practice. So to Anika's point about going to a wider range of universities, there is data out there that will enable you to understand where there are talented students on campuses like Bradford and Manchester Metropolitan. The data will point you in the direction of talented students on those campuses. But most importantly, using the data to evaluate impact. So you can put your hand on your heart as a sector and say, actually, we're beginning to really understand what works. And actually, that would be a wonderful gift for other sectors.
And you need that evidence base as well to try and get more buy-in to scale up. So that you can never get away from the data, actually, really, with this in terms of impact. How about you, Megan? Do you have any ideas around this, how we can scale up more beyond law?
Yeah, I think the successes of Prime really should be marketed to all industries. And, if industries start realising that they're missing out on a large bunch of the talent, essentially, people are not getting into these professions not because they don't have ability, it's just because they don't have the opportunity. And arguably somebody from a less advantaged background who ends up at the same endpoint as somebody who had a privileged background and has had to work harder to get there, arguably they're going to be a better employee in the long term, and they're coming from a well-grounded background. And it's something that is really important in the practical sense of actually going into the workplace. So if Prime can sort of market their success to other industries and look at the success stories and the great candidates they are getting and the great employees they're getting from these social mobility schemes, then it's likely that other industries will turn around and they'll listen and they'll take those initiatives on board themselves.
And the new website, by the way, Nicholas, is fantastic. I did look at that. And so did the young lady who's with me in the audience today. And just looking at how Prime has grown in the last couple of years. And I know you get very embarrassed when I give you the credit that you richly deserve. But again, just thank you very much indeed for chairing and for leading this important initiative. And long may it continue, Nicholas. So thank you. Right, I think we are all talked out in terms of what we want to say as a panel. I'm now ready to take any questions from the audience. I think we'll have a roving mic, or I'm hoping we will, so we'll be able to hear the questions. Thank you. There's a lady just there in the middle. All right.
Can I just ask Nicholas to expand on something he threw out? A question about, you mentioned A-level grades. Could you just...
What specifically around the A-level
you said
grades?
about A-level grades being a good indicator of...
Future success.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think there's been quite a number of firms that have kind of been moving away from considering A-level grades as the main indicator. Could you just a bit more on that?
Yeah, it's a difficult topic to discuss because statistically it's very hard to look at because there are so few firms that have recruited over a decent period of time candidates with a diverse range of A-level grades. It's very hard. So if we hear from a particular firm, for example, who certainly isn't in the room, that they're removing A-level grades because they see no correlation and they've not recruited anyone with below 2 A's and a B for 25 years, that feels like a rather odd assertion to me. So the ability for us to try and answer this question robustly is extremely limited, so perhaps I shouldn't have sounded quite so confident. But we do see in most of the data that we handle that A-level grades are a reasonably good predictor of performance. There are some exceptions, so I won't preempt Malcolm's comments later about Grant Thornton's removal of academic criteria. So the evidence base is thin. But we know from the university sector, from a number of research studies there and from a number of firms who have approached this robustly, that actually A-level grades become a particularly good predictor if you take them in the context in which they were achieved. And this narrative will be familiar to colleagues in the room, particularly those who are using things like the RARE system. So I think it's a tricky topic. Just to add a sort of footnote to that, and I can talk about the FAST stream because all of our work with them has been published, and good on them for being so transparent. The FAST stream, which is the very competitive grad scheme into the civil service, have for the last 5 years, I think, said to students, we really don't mind, we're A-level blind, we don't mind what grades you've got. When we interrogated their data, they had recruited very, very small numbers of students who had got anything but wildly exceptional A-level grades, A stars and A's. That feels deeply unhelpful to me, and I was talking with Catherine earlier, and she's still in the room. That feels deeply unhelpful to be encouraging students with grades where the odds are stacked so highly against them in the selection process. Who wins here? The student loses most, but the firm also loses its efficiency. And it feels on the cusp of, if I can be slightly hyperbolic, it feels immoral to be saying to students, we are a firm that welcomes you regardless of grades, when that's just not true. So you either do one of two things. You're honest with your applicant base, or you reform your selection process to be more inclusive. I would encourage you to do the latter if this story sounds familiar to you. That sort of answers your question, I think.
Any other questions from the audience at all? Lady at the back.
I just had a question around, Lynn had mentioned, these 5 kind of touch points of employer engagement, and I thought that was quite interesting. And then also going on to mention, scaling up, doing, 1 day of shadowing, that doesn't take, a huge amount of kind of outlay in the same way as like a full kind of programme. Those of us who work in firms where our kind of administrative functions, as it were, are not as expanded as the bigger firms, and so we're trying to do all this stuff on a relatively limited kind of a pool of people who can kind of do it. We get told a lot of the time that it's quality, structured work experience that's the most important thing, and I'm not sure. I'm interested in this, the idea of offering a day's shadowing, but in my mind, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, we get this message that it has to be a very good quality, structured kind of placement, and I'm just interested in your views on actually, yes, it's important to have that, but actually having that other touch point can be just as valuable. I'm sort of interested in hearing a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually. And I mean, don't let sort of, good get in the way of great, if you like, that sort of that quote about that. In other words, do something. I think that for lots of young people, and I think Megan's alluded to it as well, I do feel when I've worked with thousands of young people, some of these young people just need a lot more rungs on the bottom part of the ladder. And coming into a firm, I mean, just coming into an organisation, just being there on time, finding out how to get there. A lot of young people, even in London, when I worked in a school in Southwark, I took some young people to become a part of a mentoring programme. And age 16, some of them hadn't even caught a train up to London Bridge. And now that sounds ridiculous, but actually that's true. So even just coming to your offices for a day will allow somebody to do that. They will then have very honest and relevant conversations with people who know exactly what they're talking about. And you can't underestimate those. You really can't. As I said before, young people don't know what they don't know. And the more they do those things, the more confident they become. So they may not want to end up working in a law firm, but it might give them the confidence to go and do something else, as sort of Megan has alluded to, really. So I think don't be put off by thinking, what's quality? Yes, obviously, in an ideal world, I can tell you what a wonderful work experience week would look like. But actually, anything is a really good start. And for these young people, it's really, really important. I think don't not do it because you think you're not going to do it well, because actually just anything is better than nothing, really.
Yeah, I mean, just on the shadow day point, so that's what I do within my team at Roche. It's a very small team. We don't have much admin support, really. And what we do to maximise the shadow days is we send pre-work out to the students. Here's a case study. What do you think about this question? Do your own research. Here are a few pointers. They've then done that pre-work. They come in. You can have a really good hour-long discussion around their thoughts on that. And that is invaluable. And you can achieve a lot, even in half a day, if you follow that approach. So there are lots of ways that you can work around this. I hope that gives you a bit of comfort around. Wonderful, thank you. Lots of questions, great.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to pick up on something Nick said and also a little bit on Megan. Just about the culture of the companies when young people come in. I think especially if you come from regional, the north in particular, and then you come work in London, it's a very different environment. There's not people that sound like you or have the same experiences as you, and we definitely don't want to be setting young people up to fail. So I guess, Megan, from your own experience, and maybe Nick from kind of the work you've done, what have you seen as kind of really good practice of when you've met people and come into offices that they have made you feel comfortable and like you belong there and like this isn't this scary other southern world? What's been your good experiences, I guess?
Good question. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, I have been in situations where I've turned up to assessment days and, if you're north of the M25, you're the biggest northerner in the world. And I'm sure a lot of people from the north can relate to that. And it can be really daunting because, a lot of people from my local area, they just don't go into these professions. The thought of moving down to London to go to work, it's alien. Like, all my family live within a 2-mile radius. My mum and dad were very shocked when I said I'm applying for jobs in London, and it's the same with all my peers at school. So the best thing that you can do, I think, in order to combat the nerves surrounding, the South, the dreaded South, what you need to do is you need to sort of engage yourself as much as you can in, coming down to London. And this is, again, going back to social mobility schemes. I've been coming down to London now a few times a year since the age of 16. I've visited law firms' office. I've been on the tube. I've stayed down here for a few days. And slowly but surely, you become much more comfortable with the city. And it doesn't take that long for, an individual, a young person to adapt to city life. And I feel 100% comfortable in London now, and that was as a result of all the work and all the open days and all the events that I got involved in prior to actually applying for vacation schemes, so that when it came to vacation scheme, actually came down to doing the vacation scheme and the assessment days and things like that, the top priority on my mind was doing well. It wasn't, how am I going to get the tube? What do I do? I'm in this alien city. I'm so scared. It wasn't as daunting for me because of these social mobility schemes. And I think that's another reason why they're so important, just practically, going from the north to the south, it can be a really, really scary process. And, Pathways to Law and all of the schemes I've been involved with have helped with that so much.
So starting early, the earlier the better, goes a long way to build this confidence. Nick, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, just to give sort of some symmetry to Megan's comments, I guess we spend a lot of time engaging students from less advantaged backgrounds to try and make them sort of fit in. But partly, I think, was behind your question. We spend less time educating those from the sort of dominant cultural backgrounds about understanding difference. And actually, sitting in the coffee room, to give you a crude example, talking about your Oxbridge colleges is pretty alienating for some people. So I think actually it's partly about supporting, as Megan described much better than I could, supporting young people and mature students to Anika, sort of to help them assimilate, to fit in, but also educating people who are creating those dominant cultures, and helping trainees understand what sorts of things might be alienating for some other people, whether that's by social background or gender or ethnic group, etc. But ultimately, of course, partners set the tone, so that needs to come from them.
And it's that whole inclusion piece again. You just can't get away from... I love a quote by Verna Myers on the difference between diversity and inclusion, where diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And I would go a step further and, having a drinks bought for you and having canapes. And, it's that sense of belonging that you really do need to work on that. And it's a two-way street.
I can't resist, if I may, reading a quote from a young man I was interviewing at the end of last week who started at a firm. Is it okay? It's
Go
short.
for it, absolutely. It's short, I love that.
It's slightly bleak as well. He gave me permission, I should say, to reference this, because when he said it on the way out, I said, may I have permission to use your quote? He said, I work really hard to fit in every minute, every day, trying to talk about skiing, trying not to feel left out when the conversation keeps coming back to bloody Oxbridge, trying to manage my difference for the benefit of everybody else. It's bloody exhausting and it's pointless and it affects my performance. That's at the extreme end of bleak. But it goes to Anika's point about the business case for this. Here is someone spending energy and time managing their differences for the advantage of others, which I just think is such a provocative phrase, and it affects performance. Yeah. That's a business case issue as well as one around inclusion, because it feels like the right thing to do.
That's a very, very powerful quote, actually, to bear in mind. There are a couple of questions in the front here, a couple of ladies. Oh, many more ladies. Should we start with the two ladies on this side and then we'll move over? So you had your hands up first, so it's only fair.
I'm very much taken with what the panel, what's been said about giving short bursts of work experience. And I suppose in a way my question is probably almost more for Nicholas, is in order to get more firms involved in Prime, do you think it might be a good idea to actually have almost two different levels, one being 35 hours of good quality work experience, but another being just giving work experience? If all you can manage is 4 days of work shadowing, just do that.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, because 4 days of work shadowing could be for different students as well. So I think, and that's the start, it's that ladder, that little rung on that ladder. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Also, we see with a lot of students who don't have a great deal of social capital, who don't have peers, family members that have been to university, they really don't know where to start. And there are small things that can be done to help them, as you say, get on the first rung of that ladder. Speed networking, inviting a group of students in who have never been to a law firm, they don't know anyone who went to law school, they don't know anyone who went to university. Invite them in, get them to meet with different people at different levels within your organisation. Just let them start to have that glimmer of, oh, actually, this could be for me. It's not so hard. These people aren't so scary. They're wearing a suit. But this is something that I could do. So absolutely, I think it's really good.
And I think that I don't underestimate the value of conversations, really, for young people. Just getting them used to, back to the point that Nick made about the skiing thing, just get them to be able to start to talk to people, and that's a really helpful thing for them to do.
And if I could just make a point here, this links back to what I was saying about regional firms. If you did split it into, the big London firms offering structured work experience because they have the funds, they have graduate recruitment, and they have the infrastructure to be able to offer that. And then when you look at a regional smaller firm, anything that they can offer, whether it just be, 1 day shadowing, an evening, a week, if it's very informal and very unstructured, it's still better than nothing. And if that's something that's available for people, obviously from the north and you know these regional firms, then that's something that will be really beneficial.
There's another question in the front here, and then we'll move along.
Hello, I'm Catherine from Burgess Salmon, a regional firm, I'm pleased to say, not from the north, but from the southwest.
Bristol, yes.
I always find that actually I've just selected my 28 students yesterday evening, and I was overwhelmed by how many applications we had, 130. So something I'd like to perhaps talk about in the workshops later is how can we work with applying more to promote it. So I'm forever talking to other firms to urge them to do more open days, more. So I'm organising 2 open days next week for 100 students. I'm very happy to speak to the lady up there about what you can do, even just one day, because... So sorry, I'm conscious, not so much a question, but just to say that there is a lot to do and about breaking barriers. So I always say that to the students when they come in, because what a big step for a lot of them who've never been to a very posh glass building and actually finding out we're all very nice people, actually. And a lot of them come without their mates, and I always break them up if they come with their mates and they don't like that, but just to get them to mix, because that's another thing. So I think there's a lot we can do, a lot, and we do a week-long work experience. One thing we haven't talked about in that term, but I think it's there underlying, is unconscious bias, and I think it's something we're looking at a lot. But Nicholas, I'm really interested about all the research you're doing. I do like data, actually, because I think that's the only thing that backs up these things. So that quote that you just gave, that made my spine, the back of my neck raise, because I think there's a lot, and I think Rare Recruitment mentioned that when we had the first meeting. It's not about getting them in, it's are they still with you a year after, because is your culture alienating? So what do you propose can we do in terms of more unconscious bias training, perhaps? And also another aspect, is working with teachers, because what we've done this year, actually, we are part of PITC Business Class Programme. We piloted working with teachers in schools, because actually a lot of teachers, and sorry if there are teachers in the audience, but don't have a clue about the business world. They have been to school, have been to uni, back at school, they don't speak the same language, and they often can also be inhibiting. And I see, Lynn, you're shaking hands because you know what I'm talking about. So we organise an event for teachers. That's another thing that you can do with joining forces with other businesses. And it was incredible how some of the teachers didn't realise in a law firm, you don't have to be a lawyer. They thought it was all lawyers. Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I've had a 10-year career in a law firm, so working with teachers and unconscious bias, what can we do?
So anyone on the panel, unconscious bias probably is the one that is tricky. The training itself doesn't seem to be working. Nicholas seems to have some views.
So I'm not a psychologist. I think that unconscious bias has its place, but I really worry it can be deeply distracting. I worry when I ask a firm how they're doing with social mobility, and they either say, well, we do apprenticeships, to Lynn's point earlier, or they say we do contextual recruitment, as though that were the whole solution, or they say we do unconscious bias training. So I think most of, and I'm speaking from the evidence that we've got, most of the evidence we find is that there's nothing unconscious about it, actually. So let me give you a particular example, because it's probably useful to root it in specifics. When we're training partners to interview people, putting a premium on students who have, for example, studied abroad, had an internship in New York, or been president of the hockey club, all of those things are deeply correlated with social backgrounds in favour of those from more advantaged backgrounds. That's not unconscious bias, that's just about being educated about whether or not that's a good signal of talent, or that it's so closely correlated with affluence that actually it's probably unhelpful. So that for me is not unconscious bias, it's just about being enlightened, looking at the data, who are the kinds of students that have these opportunities, and actually reflecting on some of Lynn's comments. If a student can talk about their work experience in Tesco's and articulate it in a way that marries up with the qualities you might look for in a good practicing lawyer, then amen, then great. So I think it's partly about educating people about signals of talent is the language we use. How do you interpret signals of talent? I'm not dismissing unconscious bias entirely, but it's part of the jigsaw, I would say.
What about the point about teachers? Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I completely agree with you. I think one of the biggest challenges is helping to educate teachers about what opportunities are out there for the student body, what different kinds of institutions they can go to study in, what are the different types of firms that are available. As you say, there are so many students who say, well, I can't work for a law firm, I don't want to be a lawyer. Well, it's really important that they learn that, you know, you can be someone who's obsessed with technology and go and work in a law firm. You don't have to be siloed in that way. So I feel there's a lot that firms can do to help teachers have a better understanding of what opportunities are available. And if I'm completely honest, lecturers too at university. I mean, we have careers and employability services. They're fantastic. They understand business. But it's the worried well that go to the careers and employability service. It's not the people that actually need a lot of guidance with regards to what they want to do in their future career. So absolutely, to your point about teachers and to lecturers as well, help them to understand what opportunities are available for students.
So I think it sort of also puts to both points really in a way. I think the other thing that teachers really need to understand is to value those employability skills. And one of the things that I used to tell my students was that your qualifications, a bit like your passport, if you've just been given some money to go on holiday, is essential, but it's not enough. If you turn up at Gatwick Airport with your passport but no ticket and nowhere to go, you're not going anywhere. And it's that understanding that you need your qualifications, but you also need these skills, and you need to be able to talk about those skills that happen much more easily with children with more social capital who go to the independent schools where actually those things are valued. Often young people from less advantaged backgrounds feel they don't want to talk about they've got to pick up the little brother from school on Wednesday because the teacher will say, well, that means you haven't done your homework. Or, you know, that I'm in the drama production, isn't that going to affect your history work? And I think that those things that we do that are outside need to be valued as well. And I take Nick's point completely. That's a real issue in medicine particularly, that, you know, if you've gone to Kenya for a week's work experience in a hospital there, that somehow is a whole lot more important than working in a care home for a week. Is it, though? No, it's not. Of course it's not. But I think it's about making sure that we can communicate that to the teachers who actually have a really big impact, and parents. We haven't talked about parents, but parents is a really big factor as well. And I think that's a really good idea.
There's a question here about parents, I believe.
What a segue.
Wonderful segue.
Hi, yeah. It's Lucy Hutchinson from Bowen Leighton Paisner Highland. Actually, that was going to be my question, so nicely segued in. Just something we've come across recently, actually, with a few of the students we work with. Not necessarily teachers not being engaged, and definitely not the students not being engaged, but actually we've really come up against it with parents, either not seeing the value in work experience and thinking it's all about grades, or actually we've had one instance where a student felt that her mum was so against her going and working in the city that she actually lied and didn't tell her where she was during a week of work experience with us, which she beat 400 other applicants to get, which is, I mean, really shocking to us and actually really worrying, because I think even in some ways the parents have got the most influence in your life. So I don't know, and actually Megan, I don't know if you've come across this at all with any people from your school perhaps, or what comments any of you have on what we can do as businesses to work with parents.
Yeah, I think that obviously you need some sort of, at the age of 16, you need somebody in your life pushing you sort of to go to the place you want to go. You can't all come from, you know, yourself, and you either get that from your parents, or you get that from your school, or you get that from something external. And parents do play a huge role. For me personally, my parents are always very, very supportive, and I was very lucky because I didn't get any support within my school. Linking back to the point about teachers, you know, the year I sat my GCSEs, only a third of the year group got a C in Maths and English. So you can see where their priorities were. You know, there's a lot of pressure on teachers to meet these grade requirements. So the focus was not on higher education, it was how can we get our GCSE pass grades up. And it's not, oh, you want to go and do a law degree, we'll support you through that. It's we haven't got time for that, we don't have the resources for that. We've got Ofsted sort of breathing down our necks, and we've got a lot of other priorities. And so, yeah, in that sense, parents and other external factors are really, really, really important. And you can educate parents, and you can educate teachers, and you can educate the children. And I think sort of collectively together, that's the best approach.
And unfortunately, our time is up, I'm afraid, on that note. So I'd like us all to thank our wonderful panel, Megan, Nicholas, Lynn, and Anika in the museum. think we've got a video now, haven't we? So do you want us to disappear at this point? We can take our time.
whole area of diversity and inclusion is, we think it's fundamentally essential. It's not just the right thing to do, it's best business practice. I think it's really important because there are so many people who have enormous talent and who are not being given the opportunity to succeed. From my own personal perspective, I kind of had a narrative on that because I was the first to go to university in my own family, had no connections with the legal profession, and really just decided to be a lawyer because it felt like the right thing to do and I didn't want to do what everybody else in the community was doing. And then I decided to go in-house because I didn't know anybody in private practice and didn't think I fit. And many, many years later, I'm the chair of one of the largest law firms in the world, so I guess I did eventually. I think one of the huge advantages of Prime is that it is about bringing different law firms of different sizes with different perspectives from different parts of the country together, because we all have our different approaches to doing what we consider to be the right thing and the best thing. Until we've got this cracked, which hopefully will be tomorrow, but realistically it's not going to be tomorrow, the best way we can move the needle is by talking to each other and by learning from each other and learning from the mistakes which will occasionally happen. Clearly this is a competitive environment. We all want to get the best law students into our own firms, but realistically what Prime is about is broadening the pool so that all of us can take advantage of the larger pool. What we're all trying to do is give those students who are the brightest and the best the opportunities that they wouldn't have. And I think if we cooperate around that, then everybody wins. Not just the students, but us, the members of Prime. At the front end, we've completely revamped the website, and anybody who hasn't been to the website should do so. Not immediately, obviously, because I'd rather they listen to me, but they should go to primecommitment.co.uk. Fantastic website. Tailored, different sections for different constituent members, and also for students, and also for parents, and that really has taken us to a new level. With the fantastic support of the working group who have worked alongside the board, we have introduced contextual recruitment, made that available to all of our members, and I think that's a fantastic step. We have also updated and improved the best practice guidelines, and I think again that's really useful, so if members haven't had an opportunity to look at that, very much recommend that they do so. What we've also done is restructure things in terms of the way we are organised. So the board was the first thing, and we have brought more people onto the board, and we started by bringing in law firm representatives from outside London. So that was important, I think, because many of you are not city law firms, and we wanted to move away from any suggestion or perception that Prime was about what city law firms thought was best. It isn't. It's about what is best for all of our members, and they are national. And alongside that, we've got a series of working groups. So we have a working group which supports what the board is looking to achieve and frankly goes off and implements a lot of the things that the board would like to be done. The research that we undertook with you all was really important, and it gave us a clear steer, and we've acted upon that in terms of the initiatives we've undertaken. What we clearly have not done well enough as an organisation is keep sufficient data. So if we have the basic data, the raw material to be able to say we have put this many people through Prime, that's great, but it's better to be able to say we've put this many people through Prime and this many people are now employed in the legal profession. Or, and this many people have been sufficiently inspired by what they saw in Prime to have now gone on to another profession. Collaboration is critical to our success. I mean, that is why Prime exists, and it's very evident when you're sitting around the boardroom that you have different perspectives on how we can make a difference. And let's be realistic, this whole programme is about diversity and inclusion, so why wouldn't you extend that to diversity of thought, diversity of programme, diversity of initiative? By combining, we get the best of all of our contributions, and that way we can actually move the needle and make a difference. Also, I would like to see in the regions where there are a number of members who don't necessarily have the resources of the big law firms in the city or in some of our larger cities to cooperate and work together to see whether or not they can target institutions or schools in a programme which has them perhaps working for 2 or 3 days in one firm and 2 or 3 days in another firm. Again, just putting resources on the basis that 2 plus 2 is going to make 5 and that's going to get greater benefits. So I hope you're going to have a fantastic conference. I hope you're really going to benefit from it. I hope you're going to take the opportunity to talk with each other, to compare notes, to discuss best practice. I hope when you go away from this conference you should bear in mind that not everybody's been able to be here, so go back to your regions and be an ambassador for Pride. Be proud of what we are achieving collectively together as a profession. Be proud of your contribution as a member firm and encourage others to get involved and share best practice. But ultimately, tell us what you want, because that's what we're here for, to make a difference and to do it in a way that you need us to do it.
Slightly disturbing standing watching yourself on about a 5-foot screen, so I think you've probably heard enough from me. I briefly should just reinforce what Funke said and begin by thanking Funke for her very thoughtful and insightful leadership of that panel session, which was great. To thank Lynn and the ever youthful gentleman, Mr. Miller, thank you indeed. Anika, thank you very much indeed for standing in at short notice, really, really appreciated. And of course, Megan, thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed your contribution. You can relax now, okay? Can't you see why we offered her a training contract? Thank you all very much indeed. So, as you'll see, the slide speaks for itself. We're going to now have a session on the Social Mobility Index, and we are very fortunate to have the benefit of Catherine Davis, who attends our board meetings, but is a member of the Social Mobility Foundation, and essentially, in short order, ran it. And she's running this year's as well, so what better to talk us through that. And she's going to be joined by Malcolm Domisel, who's already had a couple of intros earlier during the course of the panel session. Malcolm is from Grant Thornton, and they were ranked number 1, so we need to hear from him. Thank you both.
Sorry, I need a step, otherwise you can't see me. So. Can you all hear me? Yeah, I've got a bit of a cold today, and I can't hear out of this ear, so you're going to have to bear with me slightly. If I'm talking too loudly or too quietly, do just wave. I'm Catherine. As Nicholas said, I work on the Social Mobility Index. I actually initially worked on Prime, way back in 2011, I think, when I joined the Sutton Trust a long time ago, so it's great to see so many familiar faces in the room. I'm just going to do a brief introduction about the index and the key findings from 2017, and then I'll hand over to Malcolm, who's going to talk about Grant Thornton's work in this space. So this is the top 50 from 2017. As Nicholas mentioned earlier, there's some a good number of law firms in it, which was great to see. For those of you who didn't participate last year, the index is a sort of a benchmarking tool to explore how good organisations are at being open to talent from all backgrounds. It was developed in consultation with an advisory group, of which Nick is a member from the Bridge Group, and it's based on the latest social mobility research and also our experiences of working with organisations in a variety of different sectors. 2017 was the first year we ran the index. It had 98 submissions across 17 different sectors, and those companies represented just under 1 million employees in total. So what did we learn from the legal sector? There was some really good work, particular outreach and work with young people. That won't be surprising to a lot of you in the room. It's the area that the legal sector has focused on for the longest, and there are some really great initiatives in place. However, I think there was a clear message, which was that there wasn't enough of a link between those outreach initiatives and recruitment. So the really good work that's going on in this space isn't necessarily translating into getting people into the firms and sort of staying in those firms for a long period of time. There was also some evaluation of the outreach work, but it often wasn't quite detailed enough. Most of the time this is a sort of a pre and post work experience survey, which is a great starting point, but that won't give you a huge amount of data on what students then go on to do after they've left the firm, how they achieve academically, and so we'd really recommend, where possible, tracking students into university, into careers if you can. This third point, Nick's already slightly touched on, and really what I'm talking about here is the minimum grade requirements that we have in the sector. I think there's sort of two parts to this. The first is exactly what Nick was saying, is that we don't really have an awful lot of data on this because, for the most part, people are employed with very high A-level grades. And so we don't necessarily really know that you need those grades to be a lawyer because we don't have enough data to see that actually you can do it with slightly different grades. The legal sector was an early adapter of contextual recruitment, which has been brilliant to see. But I would argue that it could actually go slightly further. So, for example, only 1% of free school meal students get 3 A's at A-level. Now, if that's a group that we are interested in and a demographic that we want to target, then really we need to be thinking, okay, what about those 14% of FSM students who get 3 C's? What do we think talent looks like for that demographic? Do we think that 3 C's is just as good an achievement as 3 A's from someone from a different background? So I think exploring what we mean by talent is something that we would encourage the sector to do. And lastly, again, this won't surprise a lot of you, but the ongoing dominance of the Russell Group universities. This isn't because we have anything against the Russell Group universities, but there are some reasons, and I'm just going to go into them briefly as to why that will mean it's harder for you to get a really sort of wide pool of applicants. The first is this. So this is just based on the index data from 2017, so all of the law firms that we had submit. And as you can see, these are the percentage of visits to universities for the Russell Group, and the pink column right at the end there is the 120 odd other universities in the UK. So you can see there's a real discrepancy there. And the other thing to say about that pink column is 47% of the top A-level grades in the country are going there. And very few law firms are accessing that talent. So you are all fishing in the same talent pool, and I think that that's not necessarily something you need to be doing when you see that there are really talented students at these other universities. This is the other reason why that's problematic. I will talk through this table. It's some Russell Group universities have got really good initiatives in place. The problem is it's not quite translating yet into seeing a more diverse pool of students at those universities. It's happening, but it's slow progress. So what this is a ranking of the Russell Group universities out of 3 different things. The first is the percentage of state school students they have at that university. So in that column, number 1 would be the university in the UK with the highest percentage of state school students. And as you can see, other than Queen's, Belfast, and that's a slight misnomer because the school system is different there, there's no one in the top 100 for the Russell Group, the state school. The second column is NSSEC, which is a measure of parental occupation. Again, you have a few. Queen Mary has done quite well there, but other than that, they're not in the top 100. And the third column there is POLA 3, and that is progression to higher education based on postcode. That's actually at 135. We had fewer data points for that, so it might look slightly better, but actually it's still not that great. What I've also included at the end there is the Teaching Excellence Framework Award, which is the government's new measure for how good universities are at teaching. And I just included that because there were some controversial decisions in there. LSE getting bronze was one of them. And if you look at their sort of measure, you'll see that universities like Aston are getting gold. So it's just slightly challenging that perception that these universities are where all the talent is and that they are the best at teaching. So things to consider. Entering the 2018 index would be obviously one of the ones I would suggest. But these 3 things are feedback we've had from people who participated last year that I think really shows why it's a worthwhile exercise. And the first is that it really should be thought of as an auditing activity rather than sort of the average top 50 competition. It is in and of itself a fairly complex process, and so we would say that just entering can really help you to start to think, oh, actually, we couldn't answer that question. Okay, we need to go and have a look at that. Or we've answered that, but actually, are we sure of that data? Maybe we should have a look at that again. The second is that it benchmarks you against other organisations. And the third, as Nicholas mentioned earlier, is that you do get individual detailed feedback reports. Every organisation who enters gets that. I should say you only have to enter in one of the 7 sections to get feedback. So if you think we're doing some really good things on outreach, but we just don't have the data for the other sections yet, that's fine. You can just submit an outreach and you'll see how you perform against other organisations. The other two things I think the sector should consider, again, these won't be much of a surprise, to really try and establish that link between outreach work and recruitment. To sort of gather the data, as Nick was saying, to understand why, we're doing all this great work at this end and then we're getting the students in, and yet we're still just not quite converting that into the higher ratio that we would like to see. And the last leads me very nicely onto Malcolm, which is challenging current definitions of talent. This is something that Grant Thornton did extremely well. It's one of the many reasons that they came top of the index last year. So I'll hand over to Malcolm to talk a bit more about that.
Thank you. Am I loud enough? Okay. Too loud? Okay. So, Grant Thornton, social mobility. I guess what makes us different is that we've approached this from 2 very different but absolutely intertwined directions. Firstly, social mobility is a business decision. I'll expand on that in a minute. And secondly, it's the right thing to do. And I'll deal with each in turn and hopefully bring out why they're absolutely intertwined. But they are, and they are at the very heart of what we do. So social mobility is a business decision. A business decision because fundamentally we're not much different to a law firm. We hire talent and then we rent it out to clients. And it kind of seems that if you want to make a decent profit, then you probably need a variety of different skills from people at different levels in their career. And so what you need is this constant refreshing of talent. And where we were 5 or 6 years ago is we were focusing all of our time on Russell Group universities, where we met all of your firms and all of our competitors and lots of other people. And that's fine, but it's a highly competitive environment in which it's difficult to differentiate yourselves. And most fundamentally, and I wrote this quote down and I tweeted it earlier because it is amazing, talent is everywhere, opportunity isn't. And that's what fundamentally, I think, where we started from. It didn't feel right that the only place to do our recruitment from was Russell Group universities. It felt like there were different ways to go. So what we did is we removed the grade requirements. We removed requirements in terms of, a good internship and all of that sort of stuff. And we focused on potential and we focused on work experience with the highest relevance, trying to bring that alive. So what we've done, because we are relentless with this, because it's a business decision, we treated it like any other business decision. We've measured the impact. And that's probably one of our major differentiators. We've measured the impact, and what we've proved is whether you went to a Russell Group university, and 5 years ago you would never have got, you would have got into the firm, or whether you didn't, and 5 years ago you wouldn't have got into the firm, there is no difference in the performance of those 2 pools of people. We bring them in from 2 different places, 2 totally different places, and they perform exactly the same. Statistically, there is no relevant difference. The ones who went to the best universities have got a slightly higher potential score, and the ones who who didn't go to the best universities have got a slightly higher performance score. So actually, we've proven already to ourselves that with that opening out to talent, actually, we've got a hugely larger group of people we can talk to, and it's made no difference to the people we bring in. And once you make a successful business decision, what you do is you look at the results and you measure them and you work out ways you can get even better. And so we are constantly challenging ourselves. Okay, so if that worked and that didn't, how can we make it even better? And so now we've gone beyond the recruitment and we're now looking at performance and talent assessment, and we're looking at potential schools and how we measure potential, and we're looking at which schools we can go to and how we can make sure we track the people we speak to. It's a business decision, and we've treated it like that. Just like moving premises or a new initiative or a new marketing spend, we've treated it as a business decision, measured it and worked out what's got better and what hasn't. And working in a building full of accountants and leading many accountants, you have to prove everything to them. And what the people can see, and they saw it on day one, and they were a little nervous about it, is actually this is a great thing to do. Our people are totally bought into it. Which I guess takes me to the second thing. Is it the right thing to do? When we started, we had to share with our people what we were doing, and understandably there was a degree of nervousness. And we had to talk about why we were doing it. And why we were doing it, it comes down to A, it's the talent pool, but B, if you looked around our firm, many of the senior leaders would never have got through the recruitment process. I would never have got through our recruitment process. I didn't have the grades, yet I am one of the 7 leaders of the firm. I'm in charge of diversity and inclusion. Allegedly, I can do some auditing as well. Yet, I've got to that point. I would never have got in the firm, would have been eliminated on the first pre-screening. And I'm not alone. Many others of my colleagues who are highly successful are the same. So our job was to sell this, and we sold it to our people by talking about our stories and what went on and how it was. And I think Funky said earlier on something about, it was taking it out of context, but you talked about we're all faking it. And Nick talked about the importance of the environment and not amending where we were. I can tell you that experience of talking to our people about where we were changing things, I came from a very different social background to most of the people in my business, and I had to fake the first 7 or 8 years. I had to learn, when you had all those knives and forks, where did you start? I had to learn, apparently some colours go with each other and some don't. I was just wearing shirts and suits on the basis of that shirt and that suit, and I had to learn all sorts of stuff. I had to learn about rugby, a game I deeply dislike. It is dull as anything, but apparently we all talk about rugby, so I have learnt the rules of rugby. I'm faking it. I had to fake it to go. After a while, faking it becomes second instinct. But our people, when they were hearing about that instantly, they were uncomfortable and they wanted to find a better way to do things. And I can say that when the announcement came out that we were #1 in the Social Mobility Index, we have an internal social media platform called Jam. It has never lit up ever before, like when we made this, when we shared where we were. Our people were literally beside themselves. They're proud of where they work, they're proud of what we've done, and they're constantly challenging us with new ideas on how we can get even better. But we start from, it's a business decision, but it's the right decision. And I put it to you as a leader in a professional services firm, there are very few occasions when you get to make a business decision which is actually the right decision. And this is it. If you don't embrace this, I seriously question it, because it has made a huge difference to my life, it's making a difference to Megan's life, and it makes a difference to... When you speak to people it's made a difference to their life, it's amazing. And actually it's got a business benefit. If you don't buy that, you won't buy anything.
I think that's it.
Thank you both very much. There's a lot of food for thought there, and very powerful call to arms at the end, Malcolm. Thank you for that. I think it's time for tea and also coffee. So I think you're going to be, if I can put it this way, led upstairs back to where we started, and then we will be available to have the roundtable sessions. So take a break and we'll let you know when we're ready for the roundtables. Thank you very much indeed.